Over the White House at Washington, the flag flies at half-staff as a grief-stricken nation mourns the death of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, President of the United States. Inside, in the historic Cabinet Room, Vice President Harry S. Truman takes the oath of office as 32nd President, administered by Chief Justice Harlan Fiske Stone.
Vice President Truman was sworn in as president in front of a portrait of former President Woodrow Wilson, whose efforts post-World War I to create lasting peace between nations crumbled and caused World War II. Truman would have to go about things very differently this time. Welcome to this Elected News exclusive Behind the United Nations. I'm your host, Luke Radel. Now, last week I had the pleasure of taking a behind-the-scenes tour of the United Nations in New York City. Now, after we got checked into the hotel, which was right across the street, I made myself familiar with the amenities, and then we looked out our window at the amazing view of New York. Now, after we got checked into our hotel, we decided to go walk down to look at the United Nations building, which is located right on the East River in Manhattan.
Momentous opening words of the Great Charter for World Peace. At San Francisco, 200 men and women of 50 nations labored to build an organization that will outlaw war for all time. President Truman attends the last session of this conference, which the whole world has anxiously watched. The President meets many famous guests, among them General Smuts, who is a delegate to that other peace conference at Versailles, and Admiral Nimitz, under whose command British and American ships are hammering at the door to Japan. At the famous Opera House, the assembled delegates hear a call for their final vote from the chief of the British delegation, Lord Halifax.
And it is now my duty, my honor and my privilege in the chair to call for a vote on the approval of the Charter of the United Nations.
Nation by nation, the delegates cast their votes. 50 peoples pledged to peace. Now the final signing of the Charter. For Britain, Lord Halifax. Edward Stettinius, Chief of America's delegation to the World Security Council. For the third Big Three partner, Mr. Gromyko, Ambassador to Washington. The Charter of mankind's deepest hopes. Humanity demands that this be the Magna Carta of lasting peace. Final speech of the conference was given in characteristic spirit by President Truman.
If we had had this charter a few years ago, and above all the will to use it, millions now dead would be alive. If we should falter in the future in our will to use it, millions now living will surely die. Well, there's a time for making plans, and there's a time for action. The time for action is here now.
We began our tour outside the United Nations, where gifts from many nations have been kept on display like a museum. And I mean lots, and lots, and lots, and lots, and lots of gifts.
America goes to war. Men of the Army, Navy, and Marines reinforce the battlefronts on 6 continents to save the homes and ideals of free men from Axis domination. In Ireland, United States fighting men who have safely crossed the submarine-infested Atlantic strengthen their ever-increasing ranks. Yanks on the march on Irish sod. The worldwide conflict brings intrepid American airmen to China's heroic fighting front.
After World War II ended, many Americans feared that a third world conflict would be started shortly thereafter, like it had been with World War I. In order to prevent such a tragic event, nations had to work together and talk about peace.
And so is created the United Nations. In 1946, the United Nations finds an interim home at Lake Success, New York. Here the Security Council meets. And here is dramatically acted out one of the great blocks to the UN's pursuit of peace.
Now, after we got inside the building, we attended a closed meeting of the National Security Council for the United Nations. Now, the meeting was closed off to the public, so I couldn't take any pictures or video, but present at the event was United States Ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, along with United Kingdom Ambassador to the UN, Karen Pierce, who we got a glimpse of outside the Delegates' Lounge. Now, there are two other councils besides the UN Security Council. There's the Economic and Social Council, as well as the Trusteeship Council, which was disbanded in the 1990s. The United Nations has won 2 Nobel Peace Prizes for their ongoing work to keep peace in nations throughout the world. They also champion the 30 human rights, formerly known as the rights of man.
1952, the UN is in its new and permanent home in the heart of New York City. Membership has grown to 60 countries. Into the lobby of the Secretariat building come representatives from every corner of the globe. This is truly the capital of the world. On floor after floor of the Secretariat building are accommodations for the staff of the United Nations and for officials of its many agencies. There are also offices for the press and other public information organizations. The General Assembly building includes the Assembly Hall, shown here, conference and committee rooms, radio studios, recording facilities, and a master control room. The General Assembly is composed of all member nations. It is the appeal body from a veto-paralyzed Security Council. For by an affirmative vote of 7 council members, critical issues can be referred to the General Assembly. And the Assembly is not bound by the veto restriction. Chief Administrative Officer of the UN is the Secretary General.
We sat in the hall of the General Assembly where President Donald Trump had spoken just a year earlier.
Now North Korea's reckless pursuit of nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles threatens the entire world with unthinkable loss of human life.
Every day, over $6 billion is spent on the military worldwide. This makes the operations of the United Nations more difficult to create lasting peace throughout the world.
By action and influence, by trial and error, the United Nations has become the conscience of the civilized world. The place where, in the field of atomic energy, President Eisenhower dramatically pledged his country's
determination to help solve the fearful atomic dilemma, to devote its entire heart and mind to find the way by which the miraculous inventiveness of man shall not be dedicated to his death, but consecrated to his life.
Here, too, Nikita Khrushchev had spoken to lay before the World Organization his proposals for disarmament. A plan that, as Khrushchev presents it, calls for all countries to effect complete disarmament within a period of 4 years.
Before we left the United Nations building, we took one last stop in at the Trusteeship Council ceremonial conference room. And there, I left my mark on the United Nations.
It is true that the organization's history to date has been a troubled and not always successful one. It has done much, and much remains still to be done. But the United Nations is today, as it was on its founding day, an institution of promise in the pursuit of peace.